I don't know if you can see that, but it says think global, act local. I tried to write it previously and I fucked it up. But I think thinking local is pretty good as well. The reason I have written that is because this video is going to be my first ever book review. I've heavy got into books, man, like the past year or so, maybe 2 years, maybe 4.5 years since I stopped drinking. I've got really into books. I was always kind of into books, but wasn't really that dedicated at reading. So the book that I'm going to review today is this book by Ellie Harrison. It's called The Glasgow Effect, which I reckon some people will have heard about, but they maybe don't realise that it's actually a book. The reason I want to do a book review of this book is because it's fucking one of the best books I've read in ages, to be honest. Alessia bought me it for my birthday this year, my 31st birthday, and she wrote on the front page, "Happy birthday, I hope this book will be useful to you, love you." And it was pure amazing. It was like, I just really loved it. The title is The Glasgow Effect, A Tale of Class, Capitalism and Carbon Footprint. And I'm really into class, I'm really into capitalism, or thinking about it at least. Don't really give a fuck about my carbon footprint because it just feels miles away. But I loved this book because Ellie just manages to bring all these different things together and actually made me want to care about my carbon footprint. And it's not that I don't care about it, I think I kind of do, but I don't know, there was just something about it. It's like a problem for rich people or something like that, right? So I was going to try and write a wee, so I wrote here, right, part 1, a brief history of neoliberalism, because the book is actually split into 3 parts. And so the first one is part 1, a brief history of neoliberalism, part 2, the Glasgow Effect, and part 3, the sustainable city of the future. And conveniently, right, I took 3 notes, right, which is, I'm not a researcher, I'm not an academic, right, so only taking 3 notes within this amazing book was actually really bad, right, not bad, but just, there was so much in this that I could have just took notes of, but I marked 3 things, right, and conveniently for me, for this video, they fall in each part, right? So the first one falls within the neoliberalism, right? And the part that I've highlighted is this section here, right? So it says, not only did New Labour want more people to see the arts as a career opportunity to become art professionals, but they also thought that the arts could be a panacea for social injustice. This is why I don't fucking take hundreds of notes in books. A little bit of self-deprecation to make myself feel comfortable there, which is actually really, really interesting because within this book, Ellie references Carol Craig quite a lot, and she references a lot of the sort of book, The Tears That Made the Clyde, which I still haven't read yet, but I've read Carol Craig's other book, The Scots Crisis of Confidence, and it blew my mind. It's changed my mindset about everything. Basically, it really like inspired me to do what I'm doing now. So that's the self-deprecating side coming out. But it said, right, but they also thought that the arts could be a panacea for social injustice. As art critic Claire Bishop writes in her book, Artificial Hells, Participatory Art and the Politics of Spectatorship, the new Labour government asked, what can the arts do for society? Answering, increase mobility, minimise crime, foster aspiration, anything but artistic experimentation, research as values in and for themselves. So that seems weird. I guess for me, the reason I've took note of that, right, and then it says arts and culture were being used to paper over the huge cracks, increasing social inequalities, environmental destruction and financial instability and uncertainty caused by all the neoliberal policies which New Labour had willfully embraced. publicly funded artists became complicit in this prolonged PR stunt. As artist and writer Morgan Quaintance puts it, neoliberal capitalism has created an existential framework in which compromise and complicity are the new original sins. So I was reading this, right, and I was just thinking, this is heavy duty stuff, right, because it used to be that artists were kind of outside the sort of, they were outside the political sphere in a way, they're not really outside it, but they were kind of creating their own work for their own reasons, right? And this basically talks about how when stuff starts to get funded, you basically are then complicit within the government's agenda, right? And Ellie's also talking about the knowledge economy, right? It says the knowledge economy and the birth of the creative industries. I should probably do it justice. It says the knowledge economy and the birth of the creative industries, and now the gig economy too, have also helped increase levels of self-employment. Individualised workers competing against each other for scarce resources and opportunities. These new industries have been major contributing factors to increasing fragmented and precarious labour market we now have. Well over 15% of the UK's workforce is now self-employed. So I started thinking about this stuff, and I was like, wow, this is like really kind of combining the idea of like being an artist, but also being a worker. And for me, that was quite powerful because I've been a worker, I've totally been a worker. I worked for a housing association for ages, and I was totally just a worker there. I went travelling in Australia, and I was a worker there. I worked on a farm. I worked on a couple of farms actually. Pure like being a worker, like actually working. And it's interesting because I find myself like in this mindset when I'm like actual work, But what this book kind of made me realise, right, is that being an artist is work as well, right? It's just like a slightly different type of work, and it's actually this kind of like precarious nature of it is actually kind of what's been sold to a lot of people, and it's really interesting. What I found so amazing about this, right, and what I find amazing about Ellie is she's obviously thinking about this stuff as well, right? And she's then creating artwork based on it, right? So she's like in 2011, suffering from the negative side effects of freelance lifestyle myself, I staged a workathon for the self-employed event in London and in Newcastle, inviting a group of people to join me in setting a world record for the most self-employed people working together on their own individual projects in the same place at the same time over the course of a normal 9-to-5 day. How mad, how interesting is that? Like, I like the idea of like events being artwork. I used to love kind of organising hip-hop events and stuff like that, or being around that, and I just thought, this is mad. I've never thought that an event could be an artwork. And so it said, and I love this as well, the call out for participants read, "Lone workers unite. Are you one of the growing number of self-employed people working in the UK? Do you often feel lonely and isolated while working? Do you find yourself working long and unregulated hours? Are you often too busy with work to socialise? Well, why not take part in the workathon for self-employed?" And I guess that to me is just pure genius, because I've went from being a worker in a kind of more normal sense where I'm around other people. I worked in a bar, so I was always around people. I worked in a shop, so I was around people. You're interacting and stuff like that. And then I've become an artist, and I'm in this room myself, I'm lone working a lot of the time. And it's interesting, man, like you go from being this worker and part of a kind of machine to just like this wee thing on your own, and it's pretty, like for me, it's pretty class, like it's pretty amazing. I would not want to go back necessarily, like 100% I wouldn't want to go back, right? But it's this idea that because you're your own boss, it's somehow better, right? And I think what I loved about this book is that it's the fucking capitalism part that's important, right? It's that part of it that's actually the important part, because work's shite under capitalism, basically. Do you know what I mean? You're getting your wealth extracted away from you. That's the kind of the crux of the matter, I guess. Do you know what I mean? I got this book, right? Or Alessia got me this book, and I knew straight away, and I knew about it because of that, right? Because back in 2016, when Ellie created the Glasgow Effect and put it on Facebook, I saw it on Facebook, right? And this is one of those like hipster moments where you're like, I saw it before it was cool, but I 100% did, right? I saw it, and there was no comments on it. And I remember thinking, what the fuck? How can somebody be getting paid 15 grand, right? How can they actually be getting paid 15 grand for this? And it's mad because I'd just come back from Australia then, and I was just starting to work in the bar, I think. I had no like inclination of the funding world, the art world. I had inclinations, I guess. I had people around me kind of doing stuff, but I didn't have anybody around me doing funding stuff, right? I didn't have anybody around me kind of doing galleries or anything like that. I didn't know any pure like legit artists in the way that I think of artists, like so like an artist who is in galleries and stuff like that, rather than like a kind of more commercial artist, right? So who's doing like commissions for bars and clubs and fucking gyms and stuff like that, right? So like commercial artists, I knew a few of them because of graffiti. That's kind of the route that a lot of graffiti writers go. They go down the kind of commercial artist, do murals for businesses, and a good way to make money, do you know what I mean? But I didn't really know people that were just like making art. I didn't really know people that went to art school. I maybe knew people, but I didn't really know them that well, and I didn't understand that kind of world. So when I first saw this, I was raging, man. I was like, what the fuck? Fucking, I'm skint, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm working, I'm fucking going to work. I can't go abroad, I can't go anywhere really, because I'm just living week to week, do you know what I mean? Which is so difficult, do you know what I mean, when you're just like working. But at the same time, I was also drinking all the time, do you know what I mean? So 2016, I was still drinking. It was my final year of drinking, and I wasn't like on the right path, right? And it's weird because like, what is the right path? And I guess for me, that's why this book is really amazing, right? Because I remember the outrage, but the first section of this book, basically Ellie's path of kind of growing up, how she grew up, how she got into art school and stuff like that. And it's amazing because I was like, fuck, that sounds like a really nice way to grow up. And I wasn't like, fuck you, how dare you deserve this? Because it wasn't like fucking spoiled or anything like that. It wasn't like some fucking, I don't know, and this is when it gets interesting. It was human, basically, right? It was really human because she talks about her parents, she talks about her sister, and she just talks about like growing up. And it just felt very like nice to just hear her story. And she explained why she was interested in certain things. So she explained why she's into public transport and stuff like that. And I just thought it was amazing, do you know what I mean? So, that's the first part. I don't think I've done that much justice, but this is my first ever book review, so we will see. We've then got part two, The Glasgow Effect, which is the title of the book. See what I've done there. So, I really liked it, right? The first chapter is called When the Chips Hit the Fan, right? Because of that picture there. And I just really like it because there's a whole story behind the actual Glasgow Effect project, right? I reckon to do this video justice, I'm probably going to need to do more research. I think I'll actually probably need to read the book again. Maybe not fully, but I want to do it justice, to be honest. Aye. Right, I'm back from my book review because I don't think I'm going to be able to kind of do it justice anyway, because it's such a dense book, right? But I'm going to try my best to at least explain what I liked about it, right? So I liked the fact that Ellie explained her history, right? in the first part, she explains her history, she explains her kind of art background, right? And her art background's really interesting because she was making kind of like installation pieces. So here's one from 2011 called A Brief History of Privatisation by Ellie, which was installed at Waterman's Art Centre in Brentford. And it basically used chairs, and this is so funny, it used electric massage chairs to reenact the history of the public service policy since the 1900s. So it's like, the chair would switch off when at the date that it was privatised, and it was obviously set up in a certain way that it would be on for a certain amount of time, I think. And then, so that just seems really smart to me, right? So I was like, wow, that's pretty genius, right? That's pretty smart just as like a concept. I think that's what I was really interested in, was the fact that a lot of Ellie's artwork was actually really, really conceptual, and it was really focused on like kind of capitalism and stuff like that. It talks about kind of getting funding as well, and I think that's been really interesting for me because until very recently, I'd never got funding, basically. I'd never thought about funding. I'd probably thought about it when this happened, actually, and I probably thought, like, I should get funding. I probably downloaded the Creative Scotland, like, how to or frequently asked questions or whatever, do you know what I mean? Like, I probably did that back in 2016 or something. I probably was looking, like, how do you get funding? I think I remember probably around this same time, another rapper, because I was kind of more involved in like hip hop at the time, a rapper that I knew actually did get Creative Scotland funding, and people were being a dick to him as well. People were raging the fact that this guy got Creative Scotland funding to do his thing. So I think there's just kind of inherently this kind of weird, like, sort of, I don't know, people are like quite against funding in a way, and I think I can kind of understand that in some respects, because it does feel a wee bit unjust that people are living in poverty and then artists are getting paid money to do things that I personally feel are a wee bit frivolous during sometimes. But I think what this book has really helped me understand is that, maybe not even understand, it's just made me aware of, and I think this is why Ellie's actually so badass, is because there is this kind of crossover between like making art and activism, and there's like the word called artivism, which I don't really like, and it kind of gets a bad rep, and it just seems a bit of a dirty word. But Ellie's definitely a contemporary artist and also an activist at the same time, and I love the fact that she combines them so perfectly, and with research basically. And I think that's what I really liked about this, right, was I've never been to art school, right? I did graphic design at Cardonald College, but there wasn't much theory in that, right? There was just like, you're kind of left to your own devices in a certain way, where you're kind of shown, right, this is what you're going to do, and then you have crits and they kind of explain, right, do this, don't do that, and they guide you. But a lot of the time you're kind of directing yourself, but there's not much research. And I think, well, there is research, but it's not really like done in a very academic way. It's more kind of like you're referencing things, and you're like a wee magpie taking creative inspiration, I guess, and like sort of aesthetic inspiration. That's more what you were encouraged to research. You were encouraged to research aesthetics. Just, do you like the look of that? Take it, make something that looks the same as that. And that seems to be the kind of graphic design way. Apologies, graphic designers, if that's really offensive, but when I was doing college, that's kind of what it felt like. So it was really interesting to hear about Ellie's ideas around sort of an artistic education and what it provides for people. And in fact, amazing, right there, creative education, right? Creative education. But none of that really mattered. I was here to learn. I had been given this amazing opportunity, 2 years study, paid for with a bursary. I would not have to worry about money. I could just focus on my work. I was desperate to research and find out what was really going on in the world, and to try and find a way of fusing of fusing together my art, my politics, and the way I live my life. So that in itself is really, really interesting to me, because I'm like, that's what I'm really trying to discover right now, and that's why I think this book is so useful, because it's just so interesting to me. I'm like, how do you fuse those things together? Because I feel very political, but I've never really kind of understood where I stand politically. An important point to make, I guess, is that this book kind of comes out at a similar time as Poverty Safari. It's kind of after Poverty Safari, but the Glasgow Effect event situation, I would like to call it, that happened, located Darren McGarvey was actually kind of played a bit of an integral role in it, I would say. Maybe not integral, but he became a bit of an archetype within it. So within the first week, I discovered that as a Glasgow School of Art student, I could also access the facilities at the University of Glasgow. It was just £40 a week for a year's swimming pass, so I started going 4 times a week at 8 AM before heading to the studio. And that's class, and you need some fitness going on in your life. I was also allowed to sit in on any of the university lectures. I got in touch with the philosophy department, and as well as I got in touch with the philosophy department, and as well as the taught MFA programme, I put together my own multidisciplinary timetable, attending several university courses. First, I did Introduction to Marx and Environmental Ethics, and then in the second semester, I studied Hegel's Philosophy of Right, alongside 2 MFA electives, Psychoanalysis and Art and Culture, led by Laura Gonzalez, and Contemporary Art, 1960 onwards, led by the late great John Calcutt. In my second year, I studied political philosophy and meta-ethics. I was attempting to work out how all these things fitted together. See, to be honest, right, me personally, because I don't come from that background, a part of that kind of scares me a wee bit, but my partner has a PhD and it kind of feels similar to that, so I'm quite interested in this stuff now, and I think this is also why this book means a lot to me, because I'm on my own kind of education journey, and I left Cumberland College, I got an HND, and then I went to do an advanced diploma, and I eventually left the advanced diploma because I'd been there for years and I just wasn't enjoying it anymore, and I think that I had quite low self-esteem, to be honest, and I think now I'm only now kind of nurturing the self-esteem to actually understand that I could read this stuff and actually learn, and I could do it. So this just sounds amazing, right? This just sounds pure class. I'm like, wow, like what a sort of beautiful opportunity, I guess, right? And part of me, I think when the Glasgow Effect thing happened, I was very bitter. I was very like, fuck this person who's educated, probably kind of middle class, fucking English, and that's a big part of it, and that kind of comes up later, is like Ellie's English, and that was like a total like thing that you're like, what the fuck, this English person taking Crave Scotland money, which I fucking love this book for as well, because it unpacks that later. What is the Glasgow Effect, right? So the Glasgow Effect is a project that Ellie created where she would stay in the city limits of Glasgow for a full year and only use her bike. No other forms of transport allowed, right? So she would only use her bike and she wouldn't leave the perimeter of the city, which when you read it on Facebook and you're a bitter kind of jaded kind of artist inside you, but you're working in a bar and you hate your life, you're gonna fucking, it's gonna piss you off, John. Why is this person getting 15 grand to do that? But having read, see that first kind of bit of the book, having read all that, I was like, this makes total sense. This is like, there's a fucking lineage here. It's like when I love hip hop and I look at the lineage of hip hop and then somebody's here and they're doing something and they're like referencing back. They're fucking mentioning Big L, they're talking about Loot Pack, they're saying anything, right? They're just like, they're referencing, they're even fucking like talking about samples and stuff like that. They're referencing, and which I think is beautiful within hip hop, because I guess what I'm saying is like, I didn't grow up as an academic or anything like that, but I grew up very much as a student of hip hop, I grew up kind of as a student of fucking Darren McGarvey, Loki, to be honest. That's a big part of my kind of political understanding and just artistic understanding and self-expression and stuff like that. I can kind of, like, a point to kind of Loki and the being MCs, like that group of MCs as a collective of people exposed me to ideas that I probably would never have been exposed to, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So as much as I didn't go to art school and get that kind of more official education, I was definitely getting that type of education. In this first chapter, in this kind of first section of the book, you understand the lineage of how Ellie got to this project, and I was totally with it. I was like, yep, cool, this makes every bit of sense, and it is actually a pure class project. It's difficult to explain, right, but the project was actually a little bit of a fuck you to the nature of having to get funding, right? So Ellie was, and I think still is, a lecturer at the Duncan of Jordanston College, I think, in Dundee, and basically as part of her trial period, or trial period as a lecturer, she had to get a grant. So you had to basically prove that you were able to get money for the university. So this grant from Creative Scotland for the Glasgow Effect was actually to tick that box, but it was to tick that box in a kind of fuck you way, because she was actually going to have to not be a lecturer for a year because she wouldn't actually be able to travel to Dundee for it. And I just thought, that's genius, man. There was also a kind of another part that I can't really remember exactly, but it was also kind of a fuck you to Creative Scotland and their kind of rigmarole. I think, maybe don't quote me on that, but there was definitely some pretty... I feel as though it's very much like Sacha Baron Cohen and Chris Morris and people like that. There was like a satire element, and I think Ellie's artwork in general is very much of that kind of ilk. It's very on the nose of like being like, look how fucking stupid this shit is, right? And look at the absurdity of this. Something that I really, really enjoy. The reason I think I like Sacha Baron Cohen and Chris Morris is they use satire and also clown kind of elements to it. And I think Ellie's artwork is very kind of that nature. It's quite in your face, it's quite loud, and it's quite absurd in some respects, and I really like that. And I think that this project was a little bit like that. It was a little bit mischievous. It was actually a little bit kind of, this is just keeps going round and round in circles. As Loki is the god of mischief, I believe. So it's the trickster element. There was definitely a trickster element, and I really, really loved that. So I would highly recommend reading this book if you were one of the people who went fucking mental at Ellie, right? When Ellie posted this thing on Facebook, right? She posted the event for the Glasgow Effect with that bag of chips, right? People lost their shit, right? People went absolutely crazy. And Loki was a kind of big voice of that, right? So the main quote that ended up in the Daily Record came from Darren, right? Came from Loki. And it said, "It's horrendously crass to parachute someone in on a poverty safari while local authorities are cutting finance to things like music tuition for Scotland's poorest kids. I don't know the artist personally, but I think we'd all benefit from an insight into what goes on in the minds of some of Scotland's middle class." And then Ellie goes on to say, "Loki, I know him. He's best pals with my old flatmate, Jane." And it's just funny because you're like, oh, the Glasgow's pretty small and people actually do know each other. And then it kind of goes into like this whole thing of like how Ellie get really kind of deep in this like terrifying sort of just like kind of negative loop with Facebook. Darren Loki McGarvey wrote, "Thousands of artists articulate the poverty experience and are marginalised culturally in favour of this kind of wishy-washy shite." He wrote again, "If gauging how people react to the news of your project is all part of the gig, then please include the following comment. Go and piss thousands of people off. Go and piss thousands of people off on your own dime and put the begging bowl away." And I think that's the kind of insidious nature of this idea of like funding being begging, and somehow people getting funded to create artwork is like begging, do you know, or that it's like it's frivolous. And I personally kind of do still worry that it's potentially frivolous, but I also love the fact that we fund art. How do you do it, man? How do you make it all link up? So that's actually what the third part goes on to discuss. The third part in the book discusses how you could actually make Glasgow a pretty badass city to live in. It explains what I fucking didn't even know about, was how Glasgow used to have a very like integrated transport network, and at a certain point that was privatised, and basically there was trams going all over the city. There's actually a pretty amazing diagram somewhere which I would love to find. I think maybe it was in a talk that Ellie gave online, because she just re-released this book for COP26. Oh no, so here it's here. So I'll get a better copy, but there was trams going everywhere, man. Like trams going out to the Drum Chapel, Knightswood, going all the way to Paisley by the looks of things. Oh no, that's maybe like that's probably the canal line, I would imagine. I don't know actually, maybe not. I don't know. Trams, buses and subway. No, it must have been a tram. A tram going all the way from like pretty much Ibrox all the way to Paisley. You can get out to Clarkston, Shettleston, Giant, like Bishop Briggs. You get up to Mary Hill, Lamb Hill, Ruck Hill, where I'm working just now, Giant. This was all connected by trams, and they were just ripped up. And that's madness, basically, Giant. Like, they just patched all that good travel goodness, and that is why Ellie actually focuses so much of her attention on transport, because it's for the people, Giant. It's actually for the people. And I recently was reflecting on how much time I used to spend on buses, and now I stay in the West End and I'm never on buses, man. Like, I went back to Paisley to see my mum and my sister, I think, and I think I was actually just going to see my mum, but that's irrelevant. Basically, I recently went back to see my mum, and I was on the bus to Paisley, and I just thought, fuck me, man, how many times was I on this bus, and how many times I grew up in Glenburn, which is even further out of Paisley, so I would spend so much time on the bus to Paisley. It was like a 15-minute bus into Paisley, and then the next bus to that was like 45 minutes to get to Glasgow, so it was like an hour to get to Glasgow, or sometimes even longer if I went in the bus that took me through Braehead and all that. So that's just a mad amount of time and resource and energy and stuff like that. So I just think that it's just the public transport thing is amazing, and there's just so many amazing things in this, right? And amazingly, I'm worried about the time, so I'm like trying to speed it up, but amazingly I've just opened the book, and it is at this bit where it says public luxury, right? And there is an idea about basically what you want to do, right, is you want private sufficiency and public luxury. And maybe I'll see it on this previous page, right? Aye, so public luxury. If we work together to co-produce the essential goods and services for everyday life, they actually don't just need to be basic. As writer George Monbiot, I don't know how you say his name. As writer George Monbiot argues, public services can and should always be luxurious. His principle is private sufficiency and public luxury. That it is the elements of our lives which are private, where we must be thrifty, living an austere life at home with the waste not want not mentality should be encouraged and celebrated. But our public services, on the other hand, they can and should be luxurious. In an interview with We Own It campaign founder Kat Hobbs, George Monbiot, I'll never get it, elaborates, if we all try to enjoy private luxury and all have our own swimming pool and tennis court, play barn and art collection and the rest of it, very quickly we will literally fill the whole world up. And you suddenly discover that only a few people can have that because there's simply not enough physical space or ecological space for everyone to do it. If you all try to live like the ultra rich today, we burn the planet up and we use all its resources and we turn it into a dystopia. We don't want that. But there is enough space for everyone to enjoy public luxury, fantastic quality public amenities, fantastic quality public amenities where everyone gets to play tennis if they want to play tennis, and everyone gets to swim if they want to swim. And there are amazing playgrounds and wonderful parks and beautiful nature reserves, and everything that you would look for in your own life to enhance your luxury is found in the public and common sphere. Then you genuinely make this a land of luxury for all rather than a luxury for some. And I think that's pure class. Like that in itself just blew my mind, because I was like, wow, we could just have really, really nice things. Like, I don't know, I think when you think about it, right, see when you go to like a museum or an art gallery or something like that, right, that's kind of this idea of like public luxury. You go and a lot of the time you have access. Sometimes they're maybe slightly private, but a lot of the time you go to these places and they're public, and it's just really beautiful, man. It's just really nice, and you get to see everybody's like on this same thing and everybody has the same access. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, because we should kind of have equal access to the same services, basically. I mean, like public, the common good of everything is worthwhile, I guess, do you know what I mean? And that really, really appeals to me, because I just think it's cool, man. So I feel as though I've probably missed some things that I wanted to say about this. I've not even really explained a lot of the stuff about the carbon footprint and stuff like that. There's this cool graph in here which kind of shows Ellie's carbon footprint for like from 2004 to 2018, and that seemed pretty cool, do you know what I mean? Like, there's the Glasgow Effect where it's just like zero. It's just a great book. I loved it. I would highly, highly recommend people check it out. If you liked Loki's Poverty Safari, then this is like the perfect companion book to it, and I just think it's class, man. Like, there's a quote from Loki that wrote Poverty Safari on the front page, right? And it says, in early 2016, I found myself at the head of an angry mob. I was so consumed by my own anger and moral certainty, it had blinded me to the fact that Ellie Harrison, in all her middle-class glory, was not an enemy, but an ally in the war I'd been fighting all my life. And I think that's what this book kind of made me realise, is that people that go to art school and they're the enemy, right? Someone that has had slightly more like kind of privilege or advantage is not my enemy. They're just part of the system as well, and they're just going about it. They're just like going through the same shit, basically. And I think what I really, really loved about this book as well is how personal it is. I think because I did grow up kind of listening to Loki and then being part of Volition, the youth group and stuff like that, Loki's always kind of wore his heart on his sleeve. And there's a phrase, and it's like the personal is political. And I really think that Poverty Safari and the Glasgow Effect use the personal in such a way that's just really, really powerful, and it's really beautiful because it's just really human. And I think it's so grounded in humanity and just the human experience, I guess, that it's just such a good example of, or they're both great examples of what life is really like, you know, in the ups and downs, the fucking putting up with people fucking witch hunting you, basically, do you know what I mean? Like, that was actually, I guess I'll end with this, right? Because it was COP26 and Ellie was relaunching the book, Ellie was hosting a cycling tour around, it was like a wee cycle around Glasgow to actually see her early warning signs at the Mitchell Library. And I decided I was going to go because I'd just finished the book and I'd been watching videos of Ellie speaking and stuff like that, and I became a big fan. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm genuinely like such a big fan. I'm really intrigued to read more stuff and hopefully kind of get to know Ellie more, because she was very kind, she was very forthcoming with her like time and energy, I guess, when I met her, and it's just really nice. So, but when I met her, I asked, how did you deal with all of the hate, right? Because there was so much hate, there was like a mad amount of hate, and for me personally, I've struggled with that a wee bit, because I've started to put myself out there a wee bit more, and I've got a bit of kind of backlash. Not even backlash, that makes it seem quite extreme, but I've got a wee bit of hate back, and it's definitely kind of got to me. And the level of hate and kind of just animosity, I guess, that Ellie faced online, I can't even really get my head around the level of it, because it was like a viral outrage, right? So I asked, how did you deal with it? And Ellie just said to me, like, basically, you just keep going, you just keep making your work. And she explained that she's never been stopped making her work, and the amount of online kind of noise and kind of discussion and anger and outrage that was thrown her way didn't really impact her creating her work. Obviously, it maybe impacted like on a kind of mental level, but it didn't really get in the way of actually being able to make work and continue to make work. And in the years since then, Jane, it's like 5 years now, I think. So she's continued to make work, and she's now just an artist again. Jane, this big thing like exploded and it was in your face. And I think it's the reason I wanted to make this video basically is because I encourage people that were outraged to read the fucking book, right? Because see, if you were that outraged, read the book and then decide if you're still outraged, right? Because I can totally get that. I can totally understand if you read this and go, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that, and actually you've gave it the time and you've listened, Jen. You've heard the human experience and all the ideas, the wealth of ideas and knowledge and wisdom in here. The amount of research that's went into this book, and it's just went into like Ellie's whole artistic career is just incredible. And I would highly recommend people go and check this book out, because I fucking loved it. And Ellie's just a pure boss, man. She's just an absolute boss, and a massive inspiration for me. And that's my first ever book review, and I loved doing it because it's a fucking amazing book. 10 out of 10 would recommend. So get in about it. Colourways, what you reading? I think that works, man. I think it's going to have to be that. Colourways, what you reading? Episode 1, The Glasgow Effect by Ellie Harrison. Check it out. Fuck's sake. Here we go.